Hi guys, welcome to chapter 1.4. Please start your warm-up problems and return back for your answers. All right, so for number 1 is about reviewing our word problems from last section. And again, that question was asking to write an expression, not an equation. So your final answer is 182 minus 11x. Please remember to put the 11x minus 2 in parentheses. That way you distribute the negative successfully. Number 2 is the same idea. Write an expression for the total distance in miles. So I let x equal the train. That leaves 10 minus x being the car. And then you just put it into an expression. You can have, if some of you guys distributed the 61 and made this a little bit more cleaner and simplified, go for it. But this is technically the correct answer. Just make sure if we give you like a multiple choice question, just see if it's simplified or not. So as long as you get to this point, we just know you have the right answer, whether you distributed or not. And then number 3 is practicing clearing fractions again. If you see an equal signs and fractions, make sure you guys are clearing them. The hardest part was remembering that this negative is important. So you had to distribute this negative when you did that second step. So as long as you did that, you should have gotten the answer to be 7. All right, today what we're learning in section 1.4 is absolute value equations. So just to go over what an absolute value is, I know you guys learned this for a long time. I think we start in late elementary school, middle school, about just what an absolute value is. So remember, an absolute value has these symbols, those just parallel lines, and there's always like a number inside, and you say like the absolute value of -6 is equal to 6, but also the absolute value of 6 is also equal to 6. But what does that actually mean? It's good for you guys to understand what things mean in math in order for you to be able to be successful in it. So all an absolute value is the distance on a number line from 0. So that's why -6 and +6 have the same answer of 6, because all we're asking is how far away is -6 from 0? How far away is 6 from 0? Well, that's why it's the same answer as 6. All right, so solving for variables inside an absolute value, as you can see, here's what we have to do for today. You're just given equations that have absolute values in them. So the first step is to isolate the absolute value, meaning get it completely by itself on one side. And then we're going to make 2 equations and solve. 2 quick things before we start doing these problems. Never, ever, ever change what is inside the absolute value. Never change it. Don't change the signs. It's the things outside the absolute value that we're going to change. And the only thing you have to particularly look for is that you will get an answer of no solution if once you isolate the absolute value, the other side is negative. Okay, because for example, you would never get the absolute value of some number is a negative number. That doesn't make sense because, again, absolute value is the distance from 0. Distance is never negative. So if you isolate it and it equals a negative number, that doesn't make sense based on the definition. So you would just stop your problem and say no solution. All right, so we're going to do a couple problems here. We're going to obviously start really easy, and then as we go through the rest of it, we'll get to the harder problems. Okay, so first steps first, you want to isolate the absolute value. So you just want to get the absolute value of W by itself. So that means subtract 5 from both sides. And then once you have it isolated, means completely by itself on one side, you make 2 equations. Because inside that absolute value symbol, it could be equal to 1 or it could be equal to -1. Because if you plug in both of these numbers inside your W, we know that's going to be a true statement. So your final answer is 1 and -1. So just to clarify, because you're like, well, you just said you can't have negative numbers. We can't have this step be negative. That's what I meant above. So if you isolate and it equaled like a -1, then you would say no solution. Your answers can definitely be negative. You're going to get a lot of those actually. So your answers can be negative. This step cannot be negative, just to clarify that. All right, number 2, let's isolate the absolute value symbols, meaning we're going to bring over -10. So adding that together, we're going to get 0. We technically can't split up 0 into two equations, so I just wanted to show you here, this is the only time you will ever have one solution because there's no such thing as positive 0 and negative 0, so your answer is just 0. But everything else we should always get two answers for. So number 3, oh look, it's already isolated, but it is technically a little bit more complicated because you have an expression inside your absolute value. So this is what I meant above by not changing the value inside the absolute value. So 4u minus 2 is going to stay the same on both equations. But for some reason, since you guys change the value on the right-hand side, meaning we're going to put a positive 10 and a negative 10, you guys want to also change, like for example, on the second equation, you guys also want to change this to a plus 2. Don't do that. We're not changing. Do not touch the inside. 4u minus 2 will stay the same. The only value that changes is this 10. Okay, so that's what I want you to look out for. So all we do is just solve these two equations. So you're going to get u equals 3. And then on this one, we're going to get u equals negative 2. So again, two answers for your problems. And like, what does this mean? Again, I always want to show you guys, what does this mean? Why are we even doing this? This means, again, if you want to check your answer, plug in 3 or negative 2 into your equations here, and that will make a true statement. So you could always check your answers. Again, as always, I encourage you to do this on quizzes and tests, just to make sure you guys are confident when you turn something in to me. Number 4, again, it's already isolated for you. We're getting a little bit easier. So what I want you guys to do is make your two equations. Again, we are not touching what's inside the absolute value. 3w minus 6 is going to stay 3w minus 6. Do not change it. The only thing that changes is a 12 becomes a negative 12. And then all we do is simply solve these two equations. So one answer is 6. That's going to make that statement true. And then the second one that's going to make this statement true is negative 2. And again, I would plug those in to my original problem to make sure and validate that I am correct. All right, number 5. So now we're going to have to solve or isolate the absolute value first before we split up our two equations. So all we have to do first is bring the positive 5 over by subtracting, which makes it negative 2. Okay, so once your absolute value is isolated, you make your two equations. But wait, again, remember that your absolute value cannot equal a negative number once it's isolated. So because this is isolated by itself on one side and you have a negative number, you stop. Okay, because the distance from 0 cannot be a negative number, so you say no solution. You don't even have to go further. If you forgot, like that was a rule, you would keep on solving, and if you checked your answer like a good student, then you would see that it doesn't even make sense, like something doesn't work out. So there's two ways that you should come to a no solution, but definitely at this point you should be thinking of no solution as soon as you see a negative number once your absolute value is isolated. All right, so again, isolate the 4w, meaning we're going to bring the 18 over by subtracting, so we get 40. Again, make two equations. So you get 4w equals 40. Same thing, but make it negative 40. So my two answers here are 10 and negative 10. All right, one more together, and then I'll have you guys do the last one by yourself. This is probably what mostly you're going to see. These last two problems are typically what you're going to probably see on a quiz or a test. It involves a little bit more algebra, let's say, for you guys to do. So we want to get the y plus 6 by itself. Okay, like think of it as like an entire variable. If you guys were solving the problem 2x minus 36 equals negative 14, think about the steps you would take to get x by itself. That's all what y plus 6 is right now. The reason I say this is because there's so many of you guys who want to like distribute this 2 inside. Absolute value is not parentheses. You cannot mess, like I said before, you cannot mess with the inside. Do not touch it. So if you want to think about it as like one giant X for right now, do that. Okay, but do not touch the inside, do not distribute, do not do anything. So what we're going to do first is bring the 36 over. And then we'll get 22. Now we divide 2 from both sides to again isolate the y plus 6. So now it's isolated, it's positive, we're good to go. So now we're just going to make 2 equations and just make one of the 11s negative. So we should get one answer is 5, one answer is negative 17. And I would definitely check my answer, especially on harder ones like this, just to verify. And you could do that easily in your head, right? We can plug in 5 right here. 5 plus 6 is 11. Absolute value is 11 is 11. So multiply by 2, get 22. Done. Okay? Do the same thing with a negative 17. If I plug in negative 17 in here, I would get negative 11. So the absolute value of that is positive 11. Again, times 2 is 22. Okay, it did not take me much effort at all, but it did verify that I am on the right track. So pause here, try number 8 all by yourself, and then you guys are ready to go in chapter or section 1.4. All right, so your answer to number 8 is going to be 16 and negative 4 as your final answer. Okay, so start those topics for me and be ready for 1.5 in your next section.